They laughed when she raised her hand. 3 men near the front actually turned around to see who'd made the bid, like it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. The auction lot in Carver County smelled like diesel and wet hay that morning, the kind of smell that gets into a coat and stays there for days. Frost still sat in the shadow of the loading chute. A line of pickup trucks idled along the fence, exhaust curling up into a sky the color of an old nickel. Somewhere behind the bleachers, a generator coughed and caught. Edith Holloway stood near the rail with a spiral notebook tucked under her arm, watching the auctioneer's assistant chalk numbers onto a board. She'd worn her husband's old canvas coat, the one with the torn pocket she'd never gotten around to mending. 41 years she'd watched him stand in lots just like this one. Now she was the one bidding. Nobody there expected her to win anything. The Holloway place sat 11 miles outside of Carver, 220 acres of mixed pasture and corn ground that Edith's husband Walter had farmed since before their children were born. He'd died in March, a heart that gave out quietly while he was checking a water line. The kind of death that farmers half expect and never plan for. Edith found him near the trough at 6 in the evening, the dog sitting beside him like it had been waiting for her. She was 66 years old. She had not run the farm by herself in her adult life. Not really. Walter handled the equipment side, the buying and selling, the auctions. Edith kept the books, raised 3 children, and ran the kitchen garden big enough to feed half the county in a good year. People in Carver knew her as Walter's wife before they knew her as anything else. That was simply how it had been, and she had never minded it while he was alive. What people didn't know, because Walter never made a show of it, was that Edith had sat beside him at the kitchen table most winters going over equipment listings, comparing engine hours, cross-checking serial numbers against service records. She caught 2 bad deals before he ever got to the lot. He used to say she had a banker's eye and a farmer's patience, which from him was about as close to a compliment as a wife could get. After the funeral, her son Daniel drove up from Ohio and spent 4 days trying to convince her to sell the place outright. He wasn't unkind about it. He simply didn't think she could manage 220 acres on her own, not at her age, not without Walter to handle the parts she'd never had to touch. Edith listened to him the way she listened to most things, quietly, without arguing, filing it away. She didn't sell. She did, however, need a tractor. Walter's old Massey Ferguson had finally given out the week before he died. The transmission gone for good, and spring planting was coming whether grief had finished with her or not. So on a Tuesday morning in April, she drove herself to the Carver County equipment auction with $11,400 from Walter's life insurance set aside for exactly one purchase, and Walter's notebook, not her own, is tucked in her coat pocket like a hand she could still hold. The auctioneer that day was a man named Roy Tilden, who ran sales out of 3 counties and had a reputation for moving lots fast. Fast was good for the consignors. It was not always good for the buyers. Lot 14 was a Kubota M7060 with a loader attachment, decent hours showing on the meter, listed as field ready. Edith had circled it twice in the catalog the night before. She'd also written 4 questions in the margin, the kind of questions Walter used to ask before he'd commit $1. When she approached the lot before the sale to look at it, a younger man working the yard for Tilden's outfit. Name of Carl, mid-30s, the kind of busy that comes from running 6 auctions a month. Waved her off without quite meaning to be rude about it. "Ma'am, we're running behind. Sales starts in 10 minutes. He didn't stop walking. "I just wanted to check the hour meter against the listing," Edith said. "It's all in the catalog." He was already 3 lots down, checking something on a clipboard. She stood there a moment, then climbed up into the cab herself. Nobody offered to help her up, and nobody stopped her either. She sat in the seat Walter would have sat in, found the hour meter, and wrote a number into her notebook. Then she climbed back down and stood near the rail to wait. A man beside her, someone she didn't recognize, said to his neighbor, not quietly, that the widow was probably just there for moral support, that surely her son or somebody was handling the bidding for her. Edith heard it. She didn't turn around. The bidding on Lot 14 opened at $6,000 and Edith raised her number almost immediately. That was the moment the three men near the front turned to look. One of them, a hog farmer named Pruitt who'd known Walter for 20 years, actually smiled. Not cruelly, just the way a man smiles when he thinks he understands something that isn't true. What none of them understood was that Edith had spent the entire previous week doing exactly the kind of work Walter used to do, except alone, in his workshop, with his notebook open on the bench beside hers. She had called the dealership in Mankato that serviced Kubota equipment and asked, plainly, what an M7060 with the hours listed in the catalog should run for in good condition, used. She wrote the answer down, $9,200 to $11,500, depending on the loader and tire wear. That was discovery number one, and it cost her nothing but a phone call most people in that yard hadn't bothered to make. Then she'd driven to the lot 2 days before the sale, during open inspection hours, when Carl wasn't rushing anyone anywhere. She brought a tape measure. Walter had taught her, years ago, almost as a joke, that a tractor's front tire wear tells you more truth than any seller will. She measured the tread depth on both front tires, 11 millimeters and 6 millimeters. Uneven wear like that, more than 5 millimeters apart side to side, usually means an alignment problem or a bent front axle housing, something that doesn't show up on a service sheet and doesn't show up in 10 minutes of looking at a tractor from across a yard. That was discovery number 2. She wrote both numbers in the notebook, the same one Walter had carried in his coat pocket for 15 years, the leather corner worn pale from his thumb. Underneath, in her own handwriting now, she added, check front axle housing before bidding past $9,000. The third discovery took longer, and it was the one that mattered most. Edith asked the dealership, almost as an afterthought, whether they could run the serial number through their service records, since Kubota dealers share warranty and service history across the network. They could, and they did, free of charge, while she waited on hold for 6 minutes listening to a tinny radio station. The tractor had been in for a hydraulic leak repair 8 months prior. Not a disqualifying repair. Not a secret, exactly. Tilden's catalog hadn't mentioned it, but it wasn't required to. It simply hadn't been asked. She wrote the repair date and the words hydraulic, rear lift cylinder beneath the tire measurements. Then she closed the notebook and sat with it on her lap for a long moment in the parked truck, looking out at nothing in particular. 3 pieces of information, none of them dramatic. All of them ignored by everyone else standing in that yard because everyone else was in a hurry, the way Carl was in a hurry, the way the whole business of auctions runs on being in a hurry. She did not tell anyone what she'd found. She did not need to. She had simply decided, sitting in that truck, exactly how high she was willing to go and exactly why. There was a fourth thing, smaller than the others, that she almost didn't bother writing down. While she'd been crouched near the loader arm, checking the tires, she noticed the bucket pins were freshly greased, far fresher than the rest of the machine, which hadn't seen grease in some time. Fresh grease on pins and nowhere else usually means somebody wanted the loader to swing smooth and quiet during inspection. Nothing more. It wasn't dishonest. Not in any way she could prove. It was just the kind of small polish sellers do before a sale, the sort of thing Walter used to call dressing the bride. She wrote it down anyway. Pins greased, rest the machine isn't. Somebody wanted this looking good for one morning. That evening, she went through Walter's notebook properly for the first time since the funeral, not searching for anything specific, just sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold beside her. Halfway through, she found an entry from 9 years back, in his cramped hand, about a different tractor at a different sale, a warning about bidding on machines that hadn't been measured firsthand, because a catalog could only sell confidence, never condition. She read it twice. Then she copied the thought onto a fresh page of her own notebook, in her own words this time, and closed the cover. The morning of the sale, she walked the lot once more before bidding opened, this time with nobody watching her closely enough to notice what she was checking. She crouched by the front axle housing, slower now, her knees not what they used to be, and found a hairline weld repair along the housing seam. Painted over, but not quite matched to the original finish. That confirmed it. The uneven tire where it wasn't random. Someone had already bent that axle once, straightened it, and sold the tractor on without saying so. She didn't need the dealership for that one. She just needed to look the way Walter always told her to look, low and slow, before anybody else got there. By the time the auction reached lot 14, 6 other lots had already sold for prices Edith judged, by her own notes, to be reasonable. Tilden's sales were efficient. Carl kept things moving. Nobody in that yard seemed inclined to slow down for a widow with a notebook. Pruitt, the hog farmer, opened the bidding himself at $6,000, clearly expecting an easy run to 9 or 10. 2 other buyers joined in fast, the way men do when they sense an item's about to slip away cheap. The number climbed to 7,000, then 7,500, all in under a minute. Edith raised her card at 8,000. That was when the laughter started, low, not cruel exactly, more the sound of men who assumed a mistake had been made and were waiting for someone to correct it. Nobody corrected it. The bidding kept climbing. 8,500, 9,000, 9,200, and Pruitt, who by now had decided this was a contest rather than a purchase, pushed it to 9,600 almost out of stubbornness. The dealership's own estimate echoed in Edith's mind. $9,200 to $11,500 for a tractor in good condition. This one wasn't in good condition. Not really. Not once you accounted for a straightened axle and an unlisted hydraulic repair. She knew exactly how much that mattered and exactly how much the men around her didn't. At 9,600, she raised her card again. Roy Tilden, the auctioneer, didn't slow his calling for a second. Auctioneers harelido. He had no reason yet to suspect the widow in the canvas coat wasn't simply caught up in the moment, bidding past good sense the way grieving people sometimes do. That was the story everyone around her had already decided to believe, and stories like that move fast in a crowd, faster than facts. Carl, working the side rail, leaned toward another hand and murmured something about letting her have it. If the price ran too high, the kind of small mercy that's really just impatience wearing a kind face. Nobody there yet understood that the mercy wasn't needed. What none of them knew was the number Edith had decided on 3 days earlier, sitting in her truck with a notebook on her lap. $9,800, and not a cent past it. She had built that ceiling out of the dealership's repair estimate, the cost of correcting a bent axle housing. Roughly $1,400 by her own phone calls to 2 different repair shops, and Walter's old rule about never paying retail for somebody else's mistake. A woman standing 2 rows back, someone Edith didn't know, leaned toward her husband and said, loud enough to carry, that surely somebody ought to step in and stop the widow before she spent her whole insurance check on a tractor. The husband shrugged and said it wasn't his business. Edith heard that too. She kept her eyes on Tilden's hand and didn't turn around, the same as before. At 9,800, she raised her card one final time. Pruitt hesitated. He looked at the tractor, then at Edith, then back at the tractor, the way a man does when a contest has stopped being about the prize and started being about pride, and he is just now noticing the difference. He let go. The hammer came down at $9,800. The yard went quiet for exactly as long as it takes a crowd to realize a thing it assumed was settled. Wasn't. Roy Tilden called the sale to Edith Holloway, and for a moment nobody moved. Carl walked over first, clipboard in hand, already halfway into a routine apology about the tire where he assumed she hadn't noticed, the kind of thing said to soften a buyer's later disappointment. Ma'am, Just so you know, before you sign, the front tires aren't matched. Might want to budget for an alignment down the line. Edith opened the notebook, found the page, and turned it so he could see. 11 millimeters. 6 millimeters. Beneath it, the date of the hydraulic repair, and beneath that, 3 words in Walter's old handwriting that she'd added to herself the night before. Axle, not alignment. Carl read it twice. He didn't say anything for a moment. You measured it, he said, not quite a question. Tuesday, Edith said. During open inspection, he looked at the tractor, then at the notebook again, then back at the tractor, the way a person looks at something they walked past every day without once stopping to check it. Pruitt had wandered over by then, curious why the sale had stalled, and he read the page over Carl's shoulder, his jaw working slightly, the smile from earlier long gone. The financial truth settled in slowly, the way these things do. Pruitt had been prepared to pay up to $11,000 for that tractor, certain it was worth every dollar of the dealership's high estimate. Edith had paid $9,800 for a machine she knew needed roughly $1,400 of axle work before it was truly field ready. Work she'd already arranged by phone with a shop in Mankato 2 days earlier, the same shop that had warned her not to let it slide past spring. Total cost to her, repairs included, just over $11,200. Less than what Pruitt would have paid for a tractor he hadn't measured at all, and far less than the risk he'd have carried not knowing about the weld. Nobody said anything for a while. Carl finally just nodded, the kind of nod that isn't an apology, but isn't nothing either, and walked off to find the paperwork. Edith signed the bill of sale at the folding table near the gate, the same table Walter used to sign at, and folded it once into her coat pocket beside the notebook. She didn't look around to see who was watching. She had already stopped expecting anyone to. Word moves slowly in a county like Carver, the way it always has, not through any one conversation, but through a dozen small ones strung together over weeks. Pruitt mentioned it at the feed store, mostly to explain why he hadn't won the lot, and the story came out a little more flattering to him than the truth, the way these stories do. Carl mentioned it to Roy Tilden, who didn't say much of anything, but the next sale he ran, he gave inspection hours an extra 15 minutes before the bidding started, without explaining why. Edith didn't tell the story herself. Not once. Not even to her son Daniel when he called the following Sunday to ask how the tractor purchase had gone. She told him it ran fine and that she'd gotten a fair price, and left it there. He didn't ask for more, and she didn't offer it. The tractor went into the shop in Mankato the following week. The axle housing straightened properly this time, the way it should have been done the first time it bent. Edith picked it up herself, paid the bill in cash, and drove it home along the county road at a pace that didn't hurry for anyone. By May, she had the corn ground planted. By June, people in town had mostly stopped saying Walter's wife and started saying Edith Holloway runs that place now, which wasn't a grand correction, just a small shift in how a sentence got built. Nobody made a fuss about it. Nobody apologized outright, either not Carl, not Pruitt, not Tilden. That wasn't really how Carver worked. But the next time she stood at a rail with her notebook, nobody laughed, and a few of them, without quite admitting why, started bringing their own tape measures. If you're watching this from a farm that's been in your family longer than anyone living can properly explain, hit subscribe. If you've ever been underestimated by people who were simply in too much of a hurry to look closely, you already know what this story was really about. We tell these stories because somewhere, right now, somebody's sitting in a truck with a notebook on their lap, deciding exactly how far they're willing to go and exactly why. Stay with us. There are more of them. Walter's notebook still sits on the kitchen table at the Holloway place, the leather corner worn pale, joined now by a second one in Edith's own hand. She doesn't write in it every day, just when something's worth remembering. A tire measurement, a price, a date a part was fixed. People in Carver still talk about auctions the way they always have, in terms of who got the best deal and who got taken. Nobody talks much about what it costs to actually look at a thing closely before deciding what it's worth. The time it takes, the questions most people don't think to ask, the patience required to crouch by an axle housing with knees that complain about it. Edith doesn't think of that April morning as a victory, exactly. She thinks of it the way she thinks of most of farming, as a long string of small, careful attentions that nobody sees unless they happen to be standing close enough, and even then, only if they're not in a hurry. Walter taught her that without ever quite meaning to teach her anything. He just measured things slowly and let her watch. The land doesn't care who's holding the notebook. It never has. It simply answers to whoever bothers to ask it the right questions, season after season, the same way it always did before she had to learn that lesson on her own.